Welcome to the Epic Flight Academy's commercial pilot course. My name is Mike Thompson, and today we're going to discuss the figure 8 on pylons. Let's get started. In this maneuver, the pilot maintains lateral axis orientation to an object on the ground. The goal is to develop the pilot's ability to maneuver the airplane accurately while dividing attention between the airplane, its flight path, and the ground. This is a complex maneuver, and here are some keys to success with this maneuver. Number 1, complete your A squared, B squared, C squared checklist. Number 2, develop an intuitive control of the airplane. See the Airplane Flying Handbook, Chapter 7, page 14, where they talk about this. In part, this means maintaining coordination at all times, no slipping or skidding. Along with this, number 3, smooth, small, and positive control inputs. In other words, feeling the airplane. Number 4, because pivotal altitude varies with ground speed, the pivotal altitude will change. However, there should be no excessive gain or loss of altitude when adjusting your pivotal altitude. Number 5, pick good pylons. However, don't make the focus of the maneuver just picking pylons. Number 6, enter the maneuver with a quartering tailwind so that your first turn is into the wind. Number 7, time your roll into your turns so that the roll-in is complete with the pylon in the proper position. Number 8, maintain a wind correction angle when flying between pylons. Number 9, remember, as we'll learn in a moment, pivotal altitude varies with ground speed. Higher ground speed, higher pivotal altitude. Lower ground speed, lower pivotal altitude. And finally, number 10, focus on developing your skill and flying at pivotal altitude using your projected reference line, which we'll define in a moment, and not any specific part of the aircraft. Now, references for this maneuver will not be the way that I do it, or the way that my instructor showed me, or any specific flight school's method, but rather the Airplane Flying Handbook 8083-3C. By the way, the Epic Flight Academy Standardization Manual follows the Airplane Flying Handbook 8083-3C. So please open the Airplane Flying Handbook to Chapter 7 and follow along as I walk you through the maneuver. There are 2 main components to this maneuver, the PRL and the PA. Now, let me explain. To get started in this maneuver, you, the pilot, must imagine a line from your eye to the pylon. This line is parallel to the lateral axis of the airplane, but is not any specific part of the airplane. Imagine a taut string from your eye to the pylon parallel to the airplane's lateral axis. This is what we mean when we talk about maintaining lateral axis orientation. Now, your instructor will review with you what makes a good pylon in your practice area, but hey, wait a minute. What exactly is meant by pylon? Well, put simply, a pylon is a tower. Here's what a traditional air racing pylon looks like. So, Imagine this taut string from your eye to the pylon parallel to the lateral axis. This string, or line of sight, is sometimes called the visual reference line, or VRL. Or it's sometimes called the projected reference line, or PRL. We'll call it the PRL. When explaining this maneuver, instructors sometimes use the term wingtip to explain the proper visual reference line. This is not correct. Please see the Airplane Flying Handbook 8083 3C on page 7-14. Different airplanes will present different views from the pilot's eye to the pylon. Imagine doing this maneuver from a U.S. Coast Guard C-130. The PRL, while not the wingtip in a 172, may be positioned in relation to the wingtip to aid in performing the maneuver. Think of this as using all available resources. But remember, they are not the same thing. And this resource may not be available on an aircraft of different design. See figure 7-11 on page 7-15 in the Airplane Flying Handbook 8083 3C, and you can see both the lateral axis and the line of sight depicted there. Instructors who focus on pylon selection and then instruct you simply to place your wingtip on the pylon and pitch accordingly do not understand the maneuver well enough to teach it properly. This focus on pylon selection and the wingtip, rather than flying the airplane in a pivot, is a defense mechanism known as compensation.
That must be Lord Farquaad's castle.
Uh-huh, that's the place.
Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
Side note, if you happen to be working on your CFI and studying the defense mechanisms in the Aviation Instructor Handbook, this is a real-world example. This maneuver is about pivoting, not about selecting pylons. So, that's the PRL. Now, PA. PA stands for pivotal altitude. Selecting the altitude to pivot at depends upon the ground speed of the aircraft. A rule of thumb for determining this approximate altitude is to square the ground speed and then divide by 11.3 if your ground speed is in knots. Now, remember, if you are not flying in Florida, be sure to add a GL to your calculation. Now, as you can see, the higher the ground speed, the higher the PA. The lower the ground speed, the lower the PA. It's smart to pre-calculate these and have them on your knee board. You can see this in figure 7-12 on page 7-15. You want to have an idea of your highest PA, pivotal altitude, on downwind, and your lowest PA, pivotal altitude, into the wind before you begin. This is part of your before maneuver setup in the A squared, B squared, C squared checklist. Be sure to review this checklist in the EPIC Standardization Manual with your flight instructor. Now, with these two keys in place, that's the PRL and PA, let's begin. we'll start by practicing flying the PA, or pivotal altitude, on just one pylon in one direction. As you approach your pylon, plan your roll in, and roll in putting the pylon in place. Your distance from the pylon affects the angle of bank. You can see that here in figure 714 on page 717. The bank angle will not affect the pivotal altitude unless it is steep enough to affect the ground speed, and that's going to be too steep. Now, quick note here. The pylon is not moving. Well, unless your friend is down in the practice area driving a pickup truck around with the pylon in the back. Of course, that would make the maneuver much more challenging. No, in fact, it is your PRL that is moving. Now, to learn to pivot the airplane, we select one pylon in the practice area, and the pilot will fly at or close to maneuvering speed. See page 7-16. At Epic, in the Cessna 172S, we enter at 95 knots indicated airspeed. Now, we're going to fly both below and above our PA so that we can recognize when the airplane pivots. At any altitude above the PA, the PRL will move rearward behind the pylon, making the pylon appear to move forward. At any altitude below the PA, the PRL will move forward of the pylon, making the pylon appear to move rearward. Remember, low, it's forward; high, it's aft. So, to begin, we'll enter at maneuvering speed at an altitude intentionally below our PA, and our PRL is forward of the pylon. In other words, the pylon is behind us. Now, I want you to look at figure 713 on page 716. Next, the pilot executes a climb to an altitude above the PA, and when the airplane is again at maneuvering speed, the pilot can see our PRL has moved to the rearward of the pylon. In other words, the pylon appears to have moved forward. Again, see figure 713. After seeing the maneuver at this higher altitude, the pilot should then reduce power and descend at maneuvering speed, continuing in a medium bank turn around the pylon. Slowly, the PRL will move forward toward the pylon. As the PRL approaches the pylon, slowly pitch up and then stop any altitude change as the airplane reaches its pivotal altitude. Now, increase power to maintain maneuvering speed, and at this point, you got it. This is how actual pivotal altitude is determined in the air. Small corrections here will keep the airplane at pivotal altitude. Remember, low, the PRL is forward. High, the PRL is aft. Now, because pivotal altitude varies with our ground speed and the airplane is in a turn, the ground speed, of course, is constantly changing. The pilot must anticipate and adjust for this by climbing or descending as necessary to hold the PRL on the pylon. Anticipate that turning upwind will lower the ground speed and therefore require a descent to hold pivotal altitude. Anticipate that turning downwind will increase the ground speed and therefore require a slight climb to hold pivotal altitude. Remember, higher ground speed, higher pivotal altitude, and lower ground speed, lower pivotal altitude. At this point, you have begun to master flying at pivotal altitude. If your first couple of circles were to the left, now do a few to the right. Apply the same procedures and practice holding your pivotal altitude. Now you have the skills to fly the 8 on pylons maneuver, and the rest is easy. Select 2 pylons about 1/2 to 3/4 nautical miles apart, where a straight line between them is perpendicular to the prevailing wind. Begin the maneuver by flying diagonally crosswind between the pylons to a point downwind from the first pylon so that the first turn can be made into the wind. Now, your angle here is really, in reality, closer to 30 degrees than 45. But instructors commonly say 45 degrees to help clarify the picture. Take a look at figure 7-10 on page 7-14. You want to be at or close to maneuvering speed and very near your first predetermined PA, or pivotal altitude, for the current wind. Remember, you've already planned ahead here by completing your A squared, B squared, C squared checklist. As you turn into the wind, you already know from the pivotal altitude rule of thumb formula that the PA will go down as the airspeed goes down, so anticipate the descent required to maintain PA. As the turn progresses toward the upwind side of the pylon, the wind becomes more of a crosswind. But since this maneuver does not require the turn to be at a constant radius, the pilot does not need to apply drift correction to complete the turn. Please see the first paragraph on page 7-17. Notice again in figure 7-10 on page 714 how the radius is smaller directly upwind or downwind of the pylon. So don't worry about the radius. Now, as you come around that first pylon and start heading downwind, anticipate the climb needed by the increase in ground speed and anticipate the wind correction angle upon rollout to wings level. Complete this rollout with your wind correction so that the airplane arrives at a point downwind of the second pylon that is equal distance from the pylon as the corresponding point was from the first pylon. This straight and level portion of the maneuver should be with the proper wind correction angle and last about 3 to 5 seconds. If the pilot is holding this straight and level portion of the maneuver for much longer than this, well, then you're going to want to set up the maneuver again and find two pylons a little closer together. With control inputs that are smooth, positive, small, and prompt, it is possible to hold the PRL directly on the pylon or pylons, even in strong winds. Now, you may want to make corrections for temporary variations, such as those caused by gusts of wind or inattention on the pilot's part, by adjusting the bank angle. This maneuver will be performed with bank angles varying from shallow to steep. Understand that the bank angle chosen does not alter the pivotal altitude, as we mentioned earlier. Again, take a look at figure 714 on page 717. So, as you can see, this maneuver is not just about methods of pylon selection. A focus on pylon selection is compensation for a poor understanding of the goals of the maneuver. Three main points that will help you master this maneuver itself are, number one, understanding that the pylon is stationary and it is the PRL from the pilot's eye to the pylon that is moving. Number two, the pivotal altitude is higher if the ground speed is higher and lower if the ground speed is lower. And finally, number three, master the maneuver by learning to maintain pivotal altitude around one pylon at a time. Once you do this, you'll understand pivotal altitude, and mastery of the figure 8 maneuver will be easy for you. A figure 8 on pylons is one of the most fun maneuvers to fly and very rewarding to master. Please review this video with your airplane flying handbook in hand, and then go out into the practice area and have some fun. And we'll see you next time.